Jackson Blake never believed in true love. A former boxer, now an auto mechanic, he is used to the hard days of life in his workshop on the outskirts of New York. His life was simple, but filled with anger at the world, at people, at himself. One day, while working as usual on an old Ford, she appeared at the door of the studio as Emma Collins, a young journalist who was commissioned with an article about the forgotten fighters in the area. Emma was the complete opposite of Jackson, energetic, bright, ready to fight for truth and justice. She admired people's stories, and his life became one of them. He didn't want to talk about himself, but something in her green eyes broke his defense. Their love flared up quickly, like a fire, and just as uncontrollably. They argued for hours about life. Emma wanted more, dreamed of a different future, while Jackson believed that a life full of poverty and uncertainty was all that was destined for him. Their quarrels stirred up passions, turning into hugs and tears. One day, they quarreled so much that Emma left, slamming the door. That evening, Jackson felt something tightening in his chest for the first time after years of solitude. Week after week, he did not receive any news about her until he accidentally saw her in the hospital, pale, with her fists clenched on the edge of the bed. She had been sick for months, but she never confessed, afraid of becoming a burden. "Why didn't you say?" Jackson burst into a scream. "Because you're already suffering enough," she whispered through her tears. This disease changed everything. Jackson left the workshop, stayed up by her bedside at night, and worked 2 jobs during the day to provide treatment. For the first time in his life, he realized that his anger was worthless in the face of true love. Together they overcame hospital corridors, impossible bills, and doctors' forecasts. But fate had its own plans. Once at an old car wash, where Jackson worked at night, old acquaintances from his past appeared. The conversation turned into a fight that almost cost him his life. Damaged rib and broken fingers, these injuries meant that he would not be able to earn money for Emma's treatment. Jackson didn't give up. He found people who invited him to return to the ring, the last fight, for a huge fee. When Emma found out, she begged him not to do it. "I don't want your blood for me," she cried. But Jackson was stubborn. This fight is his last chance to give her a future. The day of the duel has come. There was noise in the hall, and Jackson stood in front of his younger, faster rival. Each blow reminded him of Emma. The fit was brutal, but Jackson endured to the end and won. Bloody and almost unconscious, he took his fee and gave it to the doctors. A few weeks later, Emma smiled for the first time. The treatment gave hope, and Jackson, although physically crippled, knew that he had saved the most valuable thing in his life. After the fight, Jackson returned home, where Emma was waiting for him. She stood on the threshold of a small apartment, curling her arms over her chest, with tears shining on her cheeks. Jackson tried to hide the pain, but each step was given by a sharp flash in his ribs. "You shouldn't have done that," she whispered as she approached him. "I had no choice, Emma. I promised myself that I would never let you suffer alone," he replied, trying to smile. She gently touched his face, and at this moment, all their quarrels and misunderstandings disappeared. Only the truth remained. They were for each other, the light that helped them not to fall into darkness. The next few months were a test of patience and love for them. The treatment continued, and Jackson gradually recovered. His hands could no longer fight, and the workshop was closed. But he found another way to make a living, a small boxing school for local teenagers. He taught them not only techniques, but also how to prevent life from breaking itself. Emma, having recovered from treatment, finally returned to journalism. Her articles about Jackson and his struggle with the past found a response to many people. She wrote about love that overcomes pain, about the courage to face fear. And although she was still physically weak, the same shine that once conquered Jackson appeared in her eyes again. One evening, they were sitting on the roof of their house, watching the sun set over the horizon. Jackson was silent, looking at the city that once seemed alien to him. Now he saw in him a place where he became stronger. "We managed, didn't we?" Emma asked, putting her head on his shoulder. "No. We're just getting started," he replied and kissed her on the top of her head. New challenges awaited them ahead, but now they knew, together they could withstand anything. Love did not become easier, but it became deeper. Their souls were hardened in battle, and their hearts learned to forgive and believe. The next day, Jackson opened the door of his small school and met the first students. They were the same as he once did, angry at the world and confused. But he knew he could show them another way. Meanwhile, Emma was working on a new project, a book about people who overcame their fears and found hope where it wasn't. Their life was not perfect, but real. And this time, for every blow of fate, they responded with love and faith in the best. Time has passed. Jackson and Emma were able to get their lives back on track, but fate continued to put them to the test. The boxing school was gaining momentum, but its maintenance required time and money, which was always lacking. Students came with various problems. Some fled from cruel parents. Others tried to avoid criminal life on the streets of New York. For Jackson, it wasn't just a business, it was his calling. "They deserve a chance I never got," he often told Emmy. Emma lived her dream. Her articles became popular, and the book she had been working on for so long was nearing completion. Publishers became interested in her stories, but the main one remained their love with Jackson about struggle, illness, and unwavering faith in the best. But one day everything was shaken. Creditors came to the boxing school. It turned out that Jackson's old debt, which he once did not have time to pay off after Emma's hospital accounts, has grown to a critical amount. He was only given a few weeks to pay off the debt, or the school he loved so much would be closed. "We'll find a way out," Emma said, holding his hand. "We've not been through this together anymore." "Not this time, Emma." "I was tired," Jackson replied softly, and there was more pain in his voice than she had ever heard. For the first time in a long time, he was close to giving up. But that's when his students came to him. The boys and girls he taught to fight not only in the ring, but also in life, united. They organized a charity tournament to raise money for the school. News about the tournament spread throughout the city, and hundreds of people unexpectedly came to it, parents of students, old acquaintances of Jackson, as well as those who read Emma's stories. That evening, Jackson was standing in the corner of the ring, watching his students. They fought with excitement and faith, just as he once taught them. Every blow, every victory was part of their common struggle. Emma sat among the audience, unable to hold tears. "You changed their lives, Jax," she whispered as he sat down next to him after the final of the tournament. Thanks to the funds raised, the school survived. But that was not the end of the trials. In the evening after the tournament, Jackson felt a lot of pain in his chest and lost consciousness. At the hospital, doctors said that fights and years of hard work severely damaged his heart. Surgery was required, and there was little time left. "I can't lose you," Emma sobbed, holding his cold hand in her palms. "You won't lose me," he barely said. "I promise to fight for us, and I'll keep my word." The operation was difficult, but successful. While Jackson was recovering, Emma finished her book. She dedicated it to him, the man who taught her that love sometimes means not letting go, even when everything is against you. A few months later, Jackson returned to his school. The students greeted him with applause, and on the wall now hung a photo with a caption, "It doesn't matter how many times you've fallen. It's important how many times you've climbed." Emma stood next to him, holding his hand, and they looked at the children together, who continued to train. Now they knew that there would be new trials ahead, but their love would no longer break anything. Several years have passed. Jackson and Emma's life, though not easy, became stable. The boxing school has grown into a well-known center for young people, where teenagers from all over New York found hope, discipline, and meaning. Jackson no longer fought alone, but his learning methods changed the fate of many. His story began to be told as an example of courage and steadfastness. Emma became a famous writer. Her book Storm of Passion became a bestseller, and her name is a symbol of a woman who survived the darkest times. However, success did not change her. She was still sitting at an old desk in a small apartment that she and Jackson called home. One winter morning, Jackson opened the front door and saw a 16-year-old boy on the doorstep. His fist was broken, his clothes were dirty, and his look was the same as Jackson's once. "Are you Jackson Blake?" he asked, frowning. "Yes, who are you?" Jackson calmly crossed his arms over his chest. "I need help," the guy replied, looking away. The boy's name was Travis, and his life was complete chaos. His father disappeared, his mother abused alcohol, and the street turned him into a little fighter without rules. Jackson recognized himself in him, the young, angry, and lost boy he used to be. "The first lesson you'll learn here is to learn how to hold the punch," Jackson said, putting Travis in the ring. Travis didn't give up. Every day he came to the hall, driving his anger on the pair. Jackson taught him not only boxing, but also life, how to control emotions, how to stay resistant to difficulties, and how to respect himself. Subsequently, Travis became the best student of the school and even won the city championship. His victory was not just a medal, it was the street's response that he no longer obeyed its rules. At the same time, Emma was finishing her new book about the boxing school and the children who managed to find themselves. She spent a lot of time with Travis, listening to his story. "You changed his life, Jackson," she said one evening, sitting on the couch with him. "He was the one who changed it." "I just gave him the tools," Jackson replied, hugging her. However, even in moments of silence, life continued to test them. Jackson began to have health problems, old injuries made themselves felt, and his heart worried again. Doctors said a more serious vacation was needed, but Jackson couldn't leave his school. "If I leave, they'll go back to where they started," he told Emma as she once again persuaded him to reduce the load. "And if you don't stop, you won't be able to help them yourself," she replied quietly. One morning, Emma woke up and saw that Jackson was sitting in a chair on the balcony, looking at the city. He looked tired, but calm. "I realized it was time to move the matter on," he said, not looking away. "Travis is ready. I will teach him to run the school." This decision was not easy, but right. Jackson began preparing Travis for the role of mentor. The boy took it as an honor and promised never to betray his trust. A year later, the school continued to thrive under Travis. Jackson and Emma decided to go to a small town on the coast, where they always dreamed of spending old age. They bought a house by the ocean and met the dawn together every morning. "We deserve this calm," Jackson said, holding Emma's hand and looking at the waves. "We deserved it for each other," she smiled. A few years later, the silence of the ocean, the dawns and the calm rhythm of life on the coast became a real comfort for Jackson and Emma. But peace sometimes hides something more. One of the nights turned out to be particularly difficult. Jackson could not fall asleep for a long time. His heart was pounding painfully again, and memories of school, fights and their joint trials with Emma were spinning in his head. "What's bothering you?" Emma asked, waking up and walking up to him as he sat in the kitchen in the dark. "Have I done enough?" he said softly, looking at his worn-out hands. Emma came closer and hugged him from behind, putting her head on his shoulder. "You've done more than you could have imagined. Look how many lives you've changed." Her words calmed him down for a moment, but there was anxiety in Jackson's heart, as if something indescribable and invisible was calling him back. The next morning, he received a letter from Travis. Travis wrote about school, about new students, and about how difficult it is for him to make decisions when someone else's fate is at stake. "I need advice, Mr. Blake," he wrote. "I want to do everything the way you taught me, but sometimes I'm afraid I'll be wrong." Jackson looked at the letter for a long time and finally made a decision. "We're going back to New York," he told Emma at breakfast. "Forever?" she asked, although there was no longer any protest in her voice. "No. Just to remind Travis that he is not alone." Their journey back was quiet, full of nostalgia. New York met them loudly, the same yellow taxis, the bustle of the streets, and familiar places that once seemed to be an arena for battles with the world. The boxing school remained the same, only now on the walls hung photos of successful students and a large portrait of Jackson with the inscription, "Master not only of boxing, but also of life." Travis stood in the center of the hall, conducting training for beginners. After noticing Jackson and Emma, he froze for a moment and then rushed towards them. "You're back," he exclaimed. "Just for a few days, boy," Jackson replied, slapping him on the shoulder. "But I see you're doing well." That same evening, former and current students gathered at the school. Someone brought old photos, someone their winning medals. Travis spoke to everyone and said, "This school has become a family for me. I am grateful to Jackson for saving me once. But now I realize that the most important thing he taught us was to be strong not only for ourselves, but also for others." Travis' words moved Jackson to the core. That evening, he realized that his legacy would live even when he was gone. A few days later, she and Emma returned to the coast. But now Jackson was calm. He knew that the life they lived made sense. And even if his path was coming to an end, he left behind something more than himself. One morning, when the sun was just rising above the ocean, Jackson was sitting on the balcony with a cup of coffee. Emma walked over to him and smiled. "What are you thinking about?" "I was happy," he replied, looking at the horizon. Emma hugged him and whispered, "And me too." The next few months on the coast were filled with peace and quiet happiness for Jackson and Emma. They spent their days on the beach, listening to the sound of the waves and enjoying every moment. Despite his age and poor health, Jackson looked happier than ever. One evening they were sitting by the fire, looking at the stars. Emma held his hand, her voice sounded soft, "You always said you didn't deserve happiness. Are you happy now?" Jackson smiled with the corners of his lips and replied, "I'm not just happy. I am grateful. For you. For our way. For enduring it all together." At that moment, Emma realized that their fight was finally over. They overcame all obstacles, and now they could just be. However, fate prepared another final lesson. One morning, Jackson didn't wake up. He left quietly, just as he always dreamed of, in his house, next to his beloved woman, looking at the ocean. Emma sat beside him, her face was calm, but her eyes were filled with tears. "You promised me to fight to the end," she whispered, clutching his hand. "And you kept your promise." Jackson's funeral gathered many. His former students, Travis, the people from New York whom he once saved from the darkness, came to the small coast. Travis kept his speech. "Jackson taught me that life is not just about victories or defeats. It's about how you influence others." His heart was bigger than any ring. And today we are not saying goodbye. We will continue his legacy. Emma, sitting in the front row, looked at the waves and felt that Jackson was still nearby. She knew he would never leave her. He was part of every story she told the world. A year later, Emma published a new book, The Fighter's Heart. It was a book about Jackson, his life, struggle, and love. In the preface she wrote, "This story is not about death, but about life. About how one person can change the fate of hundreds of others." Jackson Blake wasn't perfect, but he was real. And that's what makes him unforgettable. The book became a bestseller, and Emma donated the money from sales to Jackson's boxing school, which was now headed by Travis. The school expanded, and it has a new hall named after Jackson Blake. There was an inscription at the entrance, "Hold the punch, even when the whole world is against you." Emma continued to live on the coast, but now her house was always open to guests, Jackson's students, his friends, and everyone who was looking for the meaning of life. She often went out to the balcony and looked at the ocean, imagining Jackson smiling at her from her seat among the stars. Several years have passed. The boxing school, founded by Jackson Blake, has now become not just a place for training, it was a symbol of hope for the whole of New York. Young boys and girls came here to find themselves, learn discipline and feel that they are not alone. Travis became not only a coach, but also a mentor, just like Jackson was to him. He often repeated, "It's not just about blows. It's about how to get up after them." In a distant house near the ocean, Emma lived a quiet life, but her voice was heard all over the world. Her book The Fighter's Heart became a world bestseller, and the image of Jackson Blake himself became a legend. The story of a man who learned to love and fight not only for himself, but also for others, touched millions of hearts. One day Emma received a letter from New York. It was written by a boy named Michael, one of the new students of the school. "Miss Collins, I didn't know Jackson Blake personally, but I feel like he helped me find the way. Travis talks about him every day, and his words make us get better. I would like to thank you for preserving its history. Now she lives in all of us." These words brought Emma to tears. She realized that Jackson's legacy continues to live not only in her, but also in every person he touched. That same evening, she sat down at her desk and began working on a new project, The Way of Fighters. This time the book was supposed to tell the stories of the students of the school, their defeats and victories, their strength to overcome circumstances. When the book was ready, Emma decided to return to New York for its presentation. The hall was full, and familiar faces sat among the guests: Travis, former students, even adult men who stood in the ring next to Jackson many years ago. Jackson has always said that there is nothing stronger than a person who has learned to get up after a fall. Emma began her speech. But I think there is something stronger. These are people who support each other when the world seems ruthless. That's the kind of person Jackson Blake was. His story doesn't end today. It continues with all of you. The hall was filled with applause. After sunset, Travis approached Emma. He looked more mature and more confident than when she last saw him. "You have to see it," he said, inviting her to school. When Emma entered the hall, her heart froze. In the middle of the large wall hung a picture of Jackson. His strong but kind gaze was looking straight ahead. Under the portrait was written in gold letters, "You haven't lost as long as you continue to fight." The children were training. The rumble of bumps on the pair was heard throughout the hall, but there was something calm and reliable in this sound. Emma walked to Travis and said, "He would be proud of you." Travis smiled and replied, "And all of us." That evening, when Emma was standing on the balcony of her old apartment in New York, she was looking into the distance. The city shone with thousands of lights, and warmth reigned in her heart. She knew that Jackson's love, his strength and legacy would never disappear. Several years have passed. New York lived its usual rhythm, but in one corner of the city, at Jackson Blake's boxing school, life flowed differently. It was a place where time seemed to slow down, and the walls remembered every cry of pain, every victory and every blow that taught me to get up again. Emma continued to come here several times a year. After her last book, The Way of the Fighters, she became not just a writer, she was a symbol of the story that Jackson created. Her books inspired not only the students of the school, but also people around the world who found their own strength in them. One day, Emma received a letter from a young girl named Sarah who was training at school. "Miss Collins, I want to thank you. Thanks to Jackson Blake's story, I realized that I could change my life. My mother raised me alone, and I always thought that this world was too cruel for me. But now I know I can fight. I can become stronger. And I will definitely do it." Emma reread this letter over and over again. Jackson left an inheritance that continued to live in everyone who crossed the threshold of that school. Her heart was filled with pride and love. That same evening she came to school. Travis greeted her with a smile and took her to the new hall. Now the school had several spacious rooms, exercise equipment, a medical office and even a classroom for personal development lessons. "You changed this place," Emma said, looking at the modern equipment. "No, Miss Collins. It was Jackson that changed him. We're just continuing his work," Travis replied. Sarah, the same girl who wrote the letter, was training in the corner of the hall. Her punches were precise and strong, but there was an unwavering focus on her face. "She has talent," Travis said, nodding at Sarah. "She can become a champion if she continues to work." Emma approached the girl when she paused to catch her breath. "Are you Sarah?" she asked, smiling gently. "Yes," the girl replied, looking at Emma a little surprised. "You wrote me a letter. I wanted to thank you for your words. And to say that you are already on the way to a great victory." Sarah was a little embarrassed, but there was a spark of confidence in her eyes. "I just want to prove to myself that I can. That I'm stronger than I seem." "You're already proving it," Emma replied and gently touched her shoulder. That evening, Emma and Travis left the school building and stopped for a moment, looking at the bright neon inscription above the entrance. "Jackson Blake's Boxing School Fighters are born here. You know, Miss Collins, I always think, what would Jackson say if he saw this place today?" Travis asked quietly. Emma smiled through her tears and replied, "He would say that it is worth all the blows, all the defeats and all the pain. Because the real victory is not the belt in the ring. It's the life you saved and the hearts you changed." Travis nodded and added, "He would be proud of us." Emma looked at the school again and realized, Jackson's legacy lives not only here, but also in everyone who felt his influence. She lives in new generations of fighters who learn to fight not only for themselves, but also for others. That night, standing on the threshold of her hotel, Emma looked at the stars and whispered, "Do you see it, Jackson? Your world continues to fight." And in the silence of the night, it seemed to her that the ocean wind had brought an answer, a light whisper, similar to the voice of a man who would never give up. "I see. I'll always be here." Many years have passed. Jackson Blake's boxing school has become a legend, and his name is a symbol of strength of spirit and unwavering faith in people. Young fighters from all over New York continued to train under his slogan, "Hold the punch, even when the whole world is against you." Emma lived out her years in the same house by the ocean where she and Jackson once found peace. Her books inspired generations, and their love story became more than simple words on the pages. She often went out to the balcony where Jackson was sitting at one time, looking at the endless waves and feeling his presence. One day she received a letter from New York. This time it was written by Travis, an adult man and a successful coach who was now raising new champions himself. "Miss Collins, I've always been afraid that I couldn't become like Jackson. But today I realized, his legacy is not just strength in his fists. This is the ability to raise others. Thank you for saving his story. Now I see that he will always be with us, in our victories, our students, and our hearts." Emma read the letter and smiled. She knew that Jackson Blake's story would never end. His legacy lived in every blow of the pair, in every decision not to give up, and in everyone who found the strength to continue the fight. One evening, when the sun was setting behind the horizon, Emma stepped out on the balcony again. She sat down in the chair, closed her eyes and felt a slight breath of wind that resembled a touch. She thought she heard a familiar voice full of warmth and strength. "You did well, Emma. Now rest." Her heart was calm. She knew that their story was completed, not tragically, but beautifully, as it was supposed to be. Two souls who went through pain and struggle found their peace. That evening, against the backdrop of the ocean, she saw the last rays of the sun spilling gold on the waves. And in this light, it seemed to her that Jackson was standing on the shore, smiling at her. True love never dies. It lives forever in memory, in hearts, and in those we love. Thus ended the story of Jackson and Emma, a story about struggle, about strength of spirit, and about love that can withstand everything.